Hello all, this is Krish from Informatica Customer Success Team. Today I'm going to discuss on audit log entries for a Taskflow in IICS. Our agenda is to building an audit mechanism for capturing Taskflow audit log entries in a database. So basically when we are executing Taskflow in IICS, we can capture the audit information, especially when the Taskflow is starting, when the Taskflow is ending, which folder the Taskflow is running, if any task flow failed, the reason for failure. So all those error details, including the start time, end time, all different audit entries we can capture in a database or even a file. So I'm going to discuss showing a demo today based on a database how this audit entry is being captured. So in this particular process to build this audit mechanism, we have a couple of steps that we have to follow. The first thing is how to capture the task flow status in real time, how to load the task flow status in a database, and how to build an audit framework using the app integration process. So these are different steps. I'm going to give a demo and we'll explain one by one each step. So in this particular approach, I have noted down all the steps. The first thing is building an app integration process for Taskflow status using a cloud application integration. Second, running a Taskflow as an API. So we all know we can publish a Taskflow. We can get the service URL. So that is what I'm talking about here, running a Taskflow as an API. Monitoring Taskflow status using a status resources. Then we'll be calling a login API for getting the iSession ID, getting the Taskflow run ID, then get the Taskflow status based on that particular run ID, and finally we'll be writing the status into a database table. To build this entire process, we'll be using these three particular APIs. The first API is to log in as an Informatica API to get the IC session ID. The second API we'll be using to pass the Taskflow name as a dynamic. That means building this process, I can run any Taskflow. So that's what the $Taskflow name is, nothing but the Taskflow that I'm going to run. The third API is indicating based on the second API, whatever the Taskflow run ID I will be getting as an output, I'll be passing that run ID to the next API to get the status. As an example, I have given what is the Taskflow name and the Taskflow run ID is an input parameters. You can see that this example. So the TF load customer data underscore Oracle AWS S3 is something like the Taskflow name. You can pass. Similarly, this particular Taskflow, when you will execute, you will get a run ID, and the next API indicates that status slash whatever the run ID that I got from the first API, and then I will get to know what is the Taskflow status when you will execute or invoking this API call. In order to capture all the details into a database, this is a sample DDL that we have created. Um, it's a table schema name. If it is in Oracle or SQL Server database, you can give info audit Taskflow. That's a name that I have chosen. It's up to your organizations how the naming convention you wanted to follow. Depending on that, you can give a name. The attributes that I'm going to capture, the run ID number, which is auto generated by IICS itself, the asset name, the asset type, location, start time, end time, duration, status, and error message, if any. So if a job failed, then you're gonna get this error message. Otherwise, the status will show as a succeed. Now, once you build this particular API, once that particular process is ready for you to invoking, we definitely can invoke that as a service URL either through a web browser or a API testing tool like Postman, but the main intention is to not only testing this particular API, we also have to schedule as an enterprise level. That means you have already completed your service, but you need to invoke. So how to automate that process? In order to automate this process, you can use enterprise scheduler like Tidal or Control MBMC, which can make the REST API call to execute this task flow. Now, using this process, you can invoke this mapping task or even a task flow into the cloud data integration using the REST v2 connection type as well. So this is an alternate approach, but we recommend to go with the process which you can invoke using a service through a Tidal or Control M, or could be any enterprise scheduler, not necessarily to be Tidal or Control M, any enterprise scheduler which can invoke this particular service as an API. Let's start to a demo. I'll be logging to IICS platform to show how I build this process. I have logged in IICS and I'm going to choose the application integrations. This particular application integration, I already built this particular service of the process. I have chosen a name called Taskflow Audit. It's up to your choice what name you have wanted to give. I'm going to explain you one by one step. So in general, which is nothing but the name that I have chosen, and then I give an API name which I'm expecting the same name to be override. This is the location where this code was built, and I also put a description which indicates this task flow will call a login service to get the IC session ID, and then it will pass it to the next API to get the run ID, which I was talking earlier as a task flow run ID. Then it will wait for task flow to finish or to come with a final status, and then using that run ID, it will call another API to get the final task flow status and writing that into a DB table in for the task flow in this particular case, but the name can be different depending on your organization's the naming conventions that you will choose. Now, before I begin this to explain, I have created couple of service connector and the app connector first, which I will be discussing first. So let's go to that. I have created two service connector called API Taskflow Run ID and Taskflow Status. Let's see what I have configured, how I have configured. This particular name, it's a free text what I have chosen. Under action, you see that the action name I have given as a task flow run ID, and then I am giving the task flow name as an input that I am going to execute. This is a testing value that I want to test, but basically that will be considered as an input parameter, and you can pass that value as a dynamic. This is the URL or API that I was explaining earlier in my slide, that this is a parameter that I wanted to pass depending on the task flow name, which is dynamic in this case, and this is the service URL. I will be performing a post, and obviously for authentication type you have to consider this user ID password, whatever you will choose. The output for this API call, I will be expecting run ID, and the test results, you can validate that, and you will see here this particular API already written this particular run ID. Now based on this service connector, I also created an app connector, Taskflow run ID. This is the app connector that I have created. So this type I have chosen wherever I have saved, and I'm running that as a cloud server. Similarly, I have created a different service connector for to get the status. In an action, you see that I have chosen name Taskflow run ID status. Input I have given Taskflow run ID and then IC session ID. So this Taskflow run ID, IC session ID, I will be getting from two different API or two different service that I'm going to make. This binding variables, the URL is whatever I have shown in my deck earlier. This Taskflow run ID is nothing but the previous app connector or the service connector you just show right now. When we tested and get a Taskflow run ID, right? So this is what I will be passing here, and the HTTP header content it is accept type is application JSON, and ID session ID is IC session ID. That's two value that I have given. And for output, I have added those at the output fields that I am expecting to be displayed in my process and writing that to the database. And once it is done, you will be publish. Obviously, you have to publish it, and then you will be building your next API Taskflow status, which is nothing but your the second um, app connector which is required in this particular case. This app connector I'm running against my local agents. And then there's the third app connector that I have created, which is a system native app connections. So because it's native, I do not need a service connector to be created separately. This is the one that I have chosen, IICS API version 2, and this is running on my agent. So this service URL and then username, it has to be your username and the password credentials. And once it is done, then the last app connector which is required here is to writing to your database. So I am writing here in an Oracle database. So I have chosen JDBC generic cloud adapter, and I filled all those details like JDBC connection URL, jar file I have placed, and then the schema, username, password, all those things I have set up. And metadata, if you validate test, you will get to know all those metadata, which is nothing but your Oracle app connector, which I have created for writing to that table. And those are the app connector I'll be using in this Taskflow info audit process. So now under start, you will see I already explained what is on the general process. I have given name, and then start I will be making a REST SOAP call. Allow anonymous access I have given. You can choose an user, specific user or groups. I'll be running against a cloud server. Input field TF name, which I have given, which is nothing but will be considered as a parameter for the Taskflow name. Output field, these are the output field name I have declared. I have already added those output field. I am not using any temp field this process. And now I'm going to this login process. Now this login process, I have given the name as a login, and the service, I choose a connection type connection, and then I go to the service connections under this particular name. I have choose this IICS login, this particular name here, and then action is login. There is no input field, no fault handling I'm doing. The next API is the service is the Taskflow ID. Now in this case again I already built this under my folder, the API Taskflow run ID, and then I will be do the action is the Taskflow run ID. This particular name, this service is expecting that input as a Taskflow name, and it will return as a run ID. And then in the assignment variable, I basically passing that run ID from this run ID, which I am getting from here. I will talk this particular process, collecting status, which is nothing but a wait status. I'll be talking it little later, but let's go to the next step. So once I get this run ID, I'm passing it to the Taskflow run ID status, which is the next or the third service I'm making a call this API. So this is the another service that I was talking earlier, the API Taskflow status. And then here it requires to input the Taskflow run ID and IC session ID. So this Taskflow run ID I'm getting for here from here, and this login APM is giving me the IC session ID. So those two inputs I will be using here, and against I will be getting these are the outputs that API gives me: the run ID, asset name, asset type, location, start time, end time, duration, status. And this is a final status, which is nothing but I'm just putting a waits for a 5 seconds to wait before I write to that database. And this assignment variable, I'm just applying, I'm assigning all my output which I get from this service, and then I'm assigning into those variables like run ID, output, asset name, asset type, which is coming from this particular service. So those, once this assignment is done, I'm checking as a status. So the status is nothing but I'm considering two-way. So the path one gives me if the status is initialized, queued, or running state, and the second one is in case if it is completed, failed, or suspended. So the end status could be anything, right? So the task flow might be completed or it might fail or suspend, any one of them. So if this initialized, queued, or running, that means if the task flow is all those, any one of those steps. So what it does, it basically jump to the next step. So it means the task flow is running. Now, every 5 seconds I'm checking, and if this task flow is not done, then it basically I'm adding a jump state to come here. And this is wait for 10 seconds. So every 10 seconds, and again I'm checking for the status. In that particular case, if the status is completed, which goes to this flow, then it will go and create an entry. Otherwise, if it is in running state, then it will go here and jump to here, and it's running as a loop. But if it is completed, or either anything failed or suspended come, which is nothing but other than this running state, then it will go and create an entry here. So this particular create task, where you will give these input fields, and those fields has been mapped from all the output fields on my previous assignment. And finally I'm writing that output, that process completed successfully, and the process is ending. This is an otherwise step. That means if it doesn't go any one of the steps, it goes and ending the process. Now, to execute the whole process, I already have I just executed the process through a Postman. So let me show you how I executed and what are the entries I made into the data. Here is my Postman, where I have making a get call. This particular service URL, I will be talking from where I got this service URL, and I am passing that as a parameter. So you see here, this is my parameter, and this is the value, and you see already this parameter I have declared as an input in my service. Once I will click send, which I already did, and this is what I got as an output, and the same output will be written into the database. Now the question is from where I got that particular service URL. So once this process is built, basically I click on save and I publish it. Once you publish and you will go to the property details, you will see that service URL. So if you take copy, this is what I did, and I paste it into Postman, and I'm passing that as a parameter with the Taskflow run as a Taskflow name. If you notice that this is the same service URL that I copied, and this is my input parameter, and this is the task flow. This is one of the task flow that I am running. Once I executed that, which you already saw, this particular output came. The output is saying the process successfully completed. I go to the database and I can show you that I executed that order by run ID for this Infotic task flow, and I can see there is this particular task flow, um, the TF Oracle flat file param. This is one of the task flow that I created and I executed. So the asset name is this, which is nothing but your task flow name. The task type is a task flow. Location, the folder that you are executing. It's indicating the start time when you executed, and is indicating the end time when it ended. This is duration, that means the task flow run 29 seconds. Status is completed. There is no error message. Previously, I ran that task flow is a different task flow. For some reason, it failed, so there was no end time. It runs for a couple of seconds, close to a minute, and then it failed. So you can see that if it fails, how it creates an entry, and if it gets succeed, then how it creates an entry. So the sending of our demo, and this particular demo we have seen that we build a process, we got the service URL, we invoke through Postman as an API, and then we able to execute the same task flow and creates an entry into a database. In a summary page, I just added below documents will give more information on the running a Taskflow as an API. So we have Informatica docs. This is the link that I have attached. You can refer this link for more information regarding those APIs, how to invoke that process, how to build the process, and what kind of informations you can get from the task, from the API level. We love to hear from you. Um, you can send a comments to the support videos and informatica.com or https twitter.com as info support. Thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you once again for watching this informatica support video. Have a great day. Thank you.